HTML is at the very heart of the internet and everything to do with web development. Combined with CSS and JavaScript, these are the three cornerstones of internet technology on the internet today. And HTML is where the very base of creating websites is founded on. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It describes basically what the browser outputs onto the web page. So it's a set of instructions that the browser uses in order to render out the content as designed from the HTML coding. And then for the CSS, it helps stylize and present that content to you, and JavaScript then helps create interaction within that content and also ability to create dynamic content as well. And you may be wondering what the difference is between HTML and HTML5. So HTML5 is essentially the latest version of HTML. Previously with HTML4, it was always just called HTML, so there was no differentiation. And with HTML5, there was a lot of brand new advancements. So it's a big step forward, and that's why you'll hear HTML and sometimes it being referred to as HTML5 for the latest version of HTML. So now with HTML5, we've got better support for audio, video, and interactive graphics, as well as HTML5 has some newer elements and more advanced functionality, including offline data storage. So in order to create HTML, there are validators, and there's a consortium called the World Wide Web, so WWW, and this is an international community of member organizations, and they help guide the development of web technologies such as HTML. So they've got a formatting checker at validator.w3.org. And when you go over to validator.w3.org, this is where you can check to make sure that your documents are valid HTML, XHTML, which is a more stricter format for HTML, and there's a few other formats here that you may or may not have heard of, and it allows you to validate them according to the web address. And there's also a validator for RSS feeds. So these are feeds that are used in order to syndicate simple content that's published on a regular basis, such as blogs, news, headlines, and so on. And also at W3C, you can, or w3.org, you can find out basically what's new with HTML, what's happening, and what's new on the web, what kind of changes are up and coming, any changes, and syntax that needs to be updated, and all of the different updates. So they've got also various cheat sheets here. So there's a cheat sheet here for HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Here you can look up various elements, see HTML elements, and it gives you more information on those elements and so on, as well as accessibility and typography. Essentially a lot of information over here, and again back to the validator, so we could take a URL and we can check to make sure that the HTML is valid, and if it's not valid, then it'll give us a summary here of different errors or issues that it finds and what should be corrected within our HTML. There are quite a few of these useful tools online in order to help you write better HTML code. A little bit more on terminology that's used in the web. So we've got HTTP, which is different than HTML because HTML is the markup language and the HTTP is the transfer protocol. So whenever you go to your favorite websites, you see that it always starts with this HTTP. Sometimes it's HTTPS for a secure page. And basically that means that this is the transfer protocol that is being used to transmit that data communication throughout the web. So basically what's happening when we go to a website, that the website files are sitting on a server and we access that website address it returns back a set of files that are sitting on the folder, and your browser interprets those files, reads them, and renders them out as visible and interactive content for web users. And that's the one good thing about HTML and when creating HTML code is that all you need is a browser to render out your HTML. And I'm going to show you that in the upcoming lesson, how we can write some HTML code on our computer and view it within our browser. And then lastly, so we already looked at HTML, so hypertext markup language. So essentially it's a markup language that the browsers use in order to display content. And then URLs, so these are uniform resource locators. So they're essentially used to reference the address of a website. So when we go over to a web page, we can see that the URL of the web page, so it's included here at the top. So it comprises the domain and essentially the path on the internet in order to access that content that you're looking for that's tied to the server content. And then also briefly what we already have covered, that there's HTML5, so again the latest version of HTML, so it gives you better HTML, more dynamic content. There's CSS, so these are cascading style sheets, and right now CSS is on its 3rd version, so sometimes you might see CSS 3 along with HTML5. So basically that's working and using the current version, and it's the presentation part of your web page, basically how the content is presented to the user, and the content is structured using HTML, and then CSS helps you present that content and helps the web browser determine what that content should look like. So for instance, background colors, font colors, different font styles, and a whole lot more, including positioning of various elements that you've created within your HTML code. And JavaScript is essentially what brings your web content to life. So JavaScript is dynamic and interactive, so it can actually change that HTML output and change your CSS via the JavaScript and alter it and present it in different ways to your web users. So if you have, for instance, you're displaying hello world on your HTML page, well, you can take that hello world and you can change in JavaScript and update that text right within JavaScript. So in the next lesson, we're going to be looking and we're going to be exploring the internet, and we're going to start by looking at how we can create HTML code and how markup language works, separating out content and presenting it within your web browser. So that's coming up in the next lesson.